In 2014, I read an article by an executive coach named Lolly Daskell, and she explained the origin of the Mahatma Gandhi quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." When I was preparing for this evening's program, I thought about that article because our guest I'm about to introduce reminded me of everything I read in that article. And what Lolly stated was, whatever changes you would like to affect in our society has to begin with you. And she went on to say, let your every moment be an example of what you teach and counsel. Let your every word and action be a reflection of your beliefs. And what she said is the best leaders the world has ever known are the reformers who were accountable and responsible for their own change. She concluded the article by stating that changing our face changes nothing, but facing our change changes everything. Welcome to A Climb to the Top, Stories of Transformation on Talk Radio 77 WABC. I'm Chuck Garcia, and my guest this evening is Terry Torok, who is Chief Innovation Officer for an organization called Enactus. And while I'll let Terry describe the organization, I want to just pronounce something very clearly. Enactus, E, entrepreneurial, A, action, us, meaning community. Welcome to Enactus. And Terry, welcome to the show.
Chuck, what a pleasure to be here. What an interesting intro to very intriguing about change and being the agent of change. How do we become the agent of our own change? And then when do we recognize it's happening? Sometimes we're often altruistic about that seed that we think we wanted to do, that aha moment whenever it lands, and sometimes in childhood, sometimes in high school, sometimes in college, and sometimes we're just always chasing it. But when you grab that seed at that moment, how do you hang on to it, and how do you nurture it? So really a great pleasure to be here. A lot of gratitude. Chuck, I love what you do. Enactus is really an interesting opportunity, and I'd love to tell you about the pathway to get there. But we often take that altruistic seed that we all had when we were young, we nurture it. So if you got a passion, if you got fire and passion, then we help grow that into performance and then move it into purpose. So all we ask for is bring us your passion. We'll help and support your purpose and surround you with the love and the support, the values, the tools you need for optimum performance in university and post-university in order to move into a life of purpose. What does that mean? Social innovation, social entrepreneurship, really purpose-based businesses. And when you look at the day we're in today, the year 2020, I feel like we were born and raised for this moment. 2020 could be our best year ever. It's a year of vision. It's a year of opportunity. It's a year of disruption. It's a year that typically an entrepreneur would want, but maybe not in this way. Mother Nature is no longer whispering to us. It's very loud and clear and very apparent. So at Enactus, Chuck, we help university students connect with great business leaders, great mentors, and help them become on a pathway to next-gen leaders and a life of purpose.
Before we dive into your story of transformation, can you just make Enactus tangible? What does it mean to an institution that has Enactus, and what do they do?
Awesome. Thank you, Chuck. You know, for our Enactus students, next-gen leaders, they typically join us on one of our 1,730 campuses across 36 countries, and we're quickly expanding. But it's their opportunity to have experiential-based learning. I would like to think of it as adventure learning, but it's learning about the community. So what does that mean? In most cases, they're not getting college credit. It means that they got something in their heart and something in their brain that drives them to be a global citizen, to have a bigger view of the world, the greatest possible context. So for those students, they have an experience guided by those on campus that provide great theory, grounds them in great theory. We provide that experience to go into communities, do a needs assessment, stop and listen to the needs of not only the community by needs of people, but also in case of how do we make this prosperous? How do we make this sustainable? And is the environment at risk? So as opposed to looking around the world as a problem, where's the problem, where's the problem? It's also looking at a lens of seeing what is beautiful. What is beautiful in the world? How might we protect it? How might we nurture it? How might we grow it? How might we turn it into an amazing opportunity? And some of those opportunities are take a project that you're experiencing in college and then move it into a potential business. So you get to work through your team, and you're saying, hey, I think we have an opportunity to turn this into a sustainable opportunity, that we've got business here that we can work out with the community. So it might be a learning opportunity. You might taking recycled plastics into 3D printers and making prosthetics. There's a whole chain of opportunities working with disadvantaged communities, working with former incarcerated. There is a plethora of amazing projects around the world, from deep in the Amazon to Uttar Pradesh, India, to China, to all over North America. And they are looking at opportunities to say, wow, could this do something for ourselves as well as the community? Could we make this into a sustainable business? Some of them move it into a .org. Some of them use it as a learning experience. Some of them transfer that project to their underclassmen as they graduate and move on. And then some of them turn them over to the community itself. Really amazing stuff.
And one question before we change topics. You are the Chief Innovation Officer, which means what?
It means that not only does anybody else not sure what I do, it's actually just, it's a really
an opportunity to write your own job description.
It is really to, first of all, listen and to be reminded that if we're not learning and not listening, we're not innovating. And sometimes people get misled by innovation, that it has to be technology-based. Innovation is what's available to us with the resources available. And it also means that it doesn't have to be an original idea. An original idea could be innovative. But what it's important is that it's collaborative opportunity for positive deviance, best practices to say, wow, there's seeds of an idea happening deep in the Amazon, or Elon Musk is engaging in open sourcing, and it's identifying what is that innovation, how do we nurture it, and how do we put it to work for us. It's social innovation, so that it's measured by, is it advancing people? Is it advancing prosperity? And is it not damaging the planet and hopefully supporting the planet?
When you graduated from college, what did you set out to do, and what did you do?
I had a very specific seed of an idea that wouldn't go away. I couldn't quiet it. It was that aha moment that says, I want to take stories from the quiet corners of the world and share them out loud. I wanted to take important stories. When I was in my college career, I wanted to be a war correspondent. I wanted to volunteer for the Peace Corps. Neither was available to me at the time. And in fact, I knew it so well that I attempted to fast track it by going to a small school in the Midwest, getting out of school, and then realizing that to really, even to volunteer in the Peace Corps, I needed to have better second language skills. Didn't have it. Wanting to be a war correspondent, I didn't have the chops. I wasn't ready. I just had the intention. I had the attention. What was taking off at that time, Chuck, I went into the dark side. Entertainment marketing was exploding. And so I took on projects. If I looked at my resume there, it looked like a mess, but everything had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it was a deep experience. I couldn't know that unless I was looking at it in retrospect. But I ended up going off into all kinds of amazing projects that led to a lot of A-list artists, that led to a lot of great entertainment, led to sponsorship. I worked with MTV for a while, some of their tours. I recently found out I'm the OG of Esports by launching something
Not a
called
bad distinction.
It's launching, working on the 1990 Nintendo World Championships. Yep, and then moved that into a TV show that I produced called Video Power, and that was the genesis of esports. But that's not what I wanted to do. I had no idea, even if I knew that esports, I had an inkling that esports would blow into a huge industry. That was not my view. That was not my vision. And so I just took a look at every one of those opportunities and said, okay, next, what's next? What's next? But all in my mind, I really wanted to return to center. My center, Chuck, was really to get back on purpose. How am I going to get those quiet stories? And it took a lot of time. I had opportunities to work with some really great A-list artists, from everybody from Elton John to Phil Collins to working with Alicia Keys, even George Clooney, Matt Damon, Kevin Bacon, many of those that, while I appreciate it, my richest, deepest, most wonderful conversations I would have with them is when they were off stage and we were talking about what was deep inside of their heart, what was important in their cause, talking to Elton John about AIDS, talking to Alicia Keys about orphans of AIDS, and then working with her to help support her. In the case of George Clooney, helping create a presentation at the United Nations about Darfur. A long path of entertainment, and I didn't know what the learning experience was until I looked back on that climb, Chuck, which was having a share of voice in the world. How perhaps too easily, or sometimes without responsibility or without taking note, you can move a huge amount of humans into a place that might not have been intentional. You can sell a lot of sugar water. You can move the needle on a brand 0.0112 and help out the shareholders. But what really kept in my heart and kept never left is, are you doing what you were meant to do? You got a lot of passion, Terry. You can measure a lot of performance, but the so what factor is, are you on purpose?
And as you were climbing these very different kinds of mountains, journalist, filmmaker, what were you to the world and what were you to yourself?
Yeah, unnamed. You know,
Right.
you laughed about chief innovation officer, but when I did it, I just took whatever role. Like, it didn't matter what the title was, but I played an intimate role. And either, you know, if a traditional, like being the creative director, the producer, whatever, I like to see things from the very inception of the creative process. Ideation, love to move that then into a left brain scenario, and got right down to the final nitty gritty of execution. So from start to finish, as long as it had an end to the story, I could hold my breath for a year, get it done like nobody's business. So took on different roles. It wasn't, there was nothing in me that desired to climb a corporate ladder or take on a role other than to have that learning experience. And at the time, you know, there's a lot of glitz and spotlight, you know, and never trying to get lost when you're working with big entertainment. You're not the party, you're just throwing it. And so, but I never, none of it was never, it wasn't important enough. So my true north really shined, you know, thankfully, it shined pretty bright for me to go, no, this isn't it, that isn't it. And then there was just a couple of key moments that was a pivot point, Chuck. Yeah.
And there is a country called the Democratic Republic of the Congo, of which we haven't read too much about over the last decade, but we know there's a lot going on. Relate to us what you were doing in those countries and give us an example of a climb, so to speak, an interaction that hasn't left you in all these years.
Yeah. You know, it's almost hard to use the analogy of a climb at that moment, because I felt I was sinking, and maybe even into the lowest form of humanity. I can't even refer to it as humankind, but there was a couple of key moments. 9/11 was one of them. I wanted to finish a project that I was able to do at the Empire State Building with Kevin Bacon, get that done. And then prior to that, I had a moment where I was working with Phil Collins, who wanted to feed the homeless in his sponsorship. And that reminded me that after 9/11, I finished the project at the Empire State Building, and then I volunteered. And I went, first of all, into the Middle East. I wanted a deep understanding of culture. I wanted to return to center. I also found myself throughout sub-Saharan Africa, and not only spending days, but weeks and then months. And I had an opportunity to volunteer somewhat as a journalist, story capturing. And what happened to me at that moment, Chuck, I found myself deep into areas of hard work for humanity. Went with a couple of different organizations as a volunteer, deep into the Congo, working with child soldiers, girl soldiers that had been wounded so poorly they had fistula, no control over their bowels, just seeing the worst of humankind. And as I was wandering through a place called, up in the tip of Kenya, a place called El Wak, pretty much a area of conflict, there was a man that was following me around quite a bit. And I was with two interpreters and a camera at the time. And he kept following me around. And I asked the interpreter, I go, what does that guy want? And they went and chased after him, and I carried on. They said, what did he want? He said, he just wanted his picture taken. I was like, okay, great. Where is he? Let's do that. And I was with a great journalist friend at that time, James. And so we took his picture, and off he went. And then I asked the interpreter, I said, why did he want his picture taken? And it was like, I don't know. Let's go find out. Let's go check it out. He comes back. So why did he want his picture taken? He said, he didn't want to be forgotten. And so
And
having that
how
information,
old is he? What do you think?
I would say the man was probably in his late 40s, maybe 50s, very weathered look. So in one sense, could have been ageless. And I realized I never had the man's name, but I had his picture, and he didn't want to be forgotten. So Chuck, big lesson there was, okay, you want to go get a story. You want to tell stories from the quiet corners. There's a man that you don't even know his story, and here you are, Terry. Couple of days later, Chuck, I'm in the Congo. I'm in South Kivu and the DRC, and I'm talking to child soldiers. We're playing music and art, and I'm in a hidden camp, working and interviewing all these child soldiers. One in particular stood out. His name was Pai Pai, wearing a Lakers uniform. Good-looking kid, 14 years old, athletic build, not an ounce of body fat. And I'm talking to him. We're doing artwork, and I said, Pai Pai, have you ever killed anybody? And he said, yes, sir, I have. I said, can you tell me how many people? He said, 19 people. And I said, how do you know you killed 19 people? He said, it was my job to know. I started when I was 12. And I said, 19 people, how did you kill them? He said, with my gun, my bayonet, and my bare hands. And he said 4 of them was his family members. And Pai Pai, I said, then did you rape any women? What else happened? He said, yes, sir, I raped a woman at gunpoint. I was 12 years old. And I said, Pai Pai, I'm sorry. And I was asking myself the question, Chuck, at the time, am I talking to a criminal, a victim, or just a boy? And some sense of all three. And when I asked him about raping a woman, I said, how did you feel? He said, I was exhausted and later ashamed. And he did it at gunpoint. So you could say, well, that's just a faraway story in a quiet corner of the world. And Terry, isn't that what you wanted to do? Now I had that story. Now what was I going to do? And even if it ended up somewhere on the corner page of the New York Times, then so what? What about that? What about that? And so in deeper investigation to say, well, why would this boy become a child soldier? When you really unravel that and unpack it, what was fueling that child soldier was a difference in his life that he could feel like he belonged. And how they were able to recruit child soldiers is because there's a small element inside of all of our cell phones that they were mining and making profit from. And so while we may think, oh, that's a problem somewhere in the Congo, we're all contributing to it in our cell phones. So suddenly, now I had that story. That's what I always wanted to. There was no way back in college I could have been responsible, because even then, as a mature man, I didn't know what to do with that story either. I just know, Chuck, it never left me. And so I immediately moved into what to do. And from that moment, I felt I was in refugee camps with no sewage, children running everywhere. It was the worst of humanity. Sometimes when we complain about things in North America or US, I'd love to transport people there and say, here's just some context. But what happened for me, Chuck, I became overwhelmed, and it was a lot of sleepless nights, many, many trips stage. And somebody told me about this group called Enactus. I'm like, the strange name, never heard of it. And I flew from Cape Town, South Africa.
Okay, hold that for just a second. Let me do a statement.
Cool, man. Cool.
Thank you for sharing that. You're listening to A Climb to the Top, Stories of Transformation on Talk Radio 77 WABC. I'm Chuck Garcia, and my guest this evening is Terry Torok. Terry, thank you for sharing your story that gets to the heart, I think, of any human being who can relate to. You have seen the worst in humanity. How do you come back to America, and what do you do with it? So explain your integration to Enactus.
Yeah, it's so now you have these stories in your head and your heart. And, I use the child soldier as one example, the young girl soldiers, but also in the refugee camp. And it feels overwhelming. It feels like there's not enough of me. There's nothing I can, it's too big to comprehend, and it's tough, and there's good people working in that space. What could I possibly do? So when I came back to the US, I also felt disenfranchised with friends. Like I didn't, weekend conversations were different for me, and they noticed it in me, and I felt bad. Like I wasn't able to share on a level that I felt responsible for sharing this information. And I think they were like, yeah, what, they were kind, but I could tell that it was hard to connect. And so I couldn't leave that. And so at some point, Chuck, giving some talks about these experiences, and then deep in my heart, wondering what to do, I had an opportunity to go from Cape Town, South Africa, where I was doing some work in township with a wonderful organization called Lalela at the time, and also with Build On, two great organizations. And I wanted to experience what somebody told me about Enactus. And so I thought, okay, the last opportunity I had to see it was in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I thought I could just fly across from Cape Town. No such luck. I didn't have my passport stamp, so I flew back, got expedited for the United Nations, went back to Sao Paulo, and I saw a sea of solutions. I met Enactus students in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I met some of the most beautiful, remarkable young human beings, guided there by a gentleman by the name of Clever. And in watching that story, I didn't know when I got to Sao Paulo that they would be presenting their projects in Portuguese.
You don't speak Portuguese, do you?
There's the old lesson from, hey, you don't have a second language, you can't even volunteer as a Peace Corps. And what happened at that moment is language went away. It didn't matter. I didn't know their words, but I felt it. It was powerful, and it has never left me. Enactus, there are many organizations that are in the space of Enactus helping young people find their purpose with their passion. But Enactus was particularly interesting to see the stage and the voice that they gave young people that don't have a stage and don't typically have a voice. And so most of your listeners probably never heard of this thing called Enactus. But it is time we start to think about what are those kind of organizations out there, Chuck, where young people doing amazing things on great adventures, and how do we give them the kind of spotlight that they deserve, that happens in sports, that happens in esports, that happens in the other worlds of media. They're not out making news by protesting. They're quietly doing projects and not advocating. We all have a voice, and we have a freedom of speech, and this amazing right that we have. But I'm also offering that these students don't do it for that. They do it for the deep purpose of moving and advancing projects for humankind.
I want to explore something else, because I think this is universal. After you have gone through your stories of Pai, the 50-year-old gentleman who didn't want to be forgotten, you come back to the American, we're complaining there's not enough meat on the shelves. There are not enough eggs in the refrigerator. How do you come to grips with the perspective that others see, and you can't imagine? What are you complaining about? Burden or opportunity? Help our listeners understand your point of view.
Yeah, everybody's issues are real. Even when I come home here, I have two beautiful boys, Elijah Genesis and Justice. And Elijah is content creator, a rebel with a cause, young, great personality, goes to UC Boulder.
I like him already.
Yeah, he's super cool kid. And his older brother, Justice, he is a big boy, 6'2", looks like a big football player. He has about 50 words to his repertoire. He's, I mean that, Chuck. He's a taxic and a praxic and on the low end of the spectrum. So,
but you know where you stand with him.
Yeah, man. So he's my lesson in being very, very present. And I use that as an example as such. Even coming back home, coming back to the States, that's real to me. Whatever we live with and our challenges are real to us. If we can visit the greater context and compare where are we in the world, it doesn't make our problems any less or should be quieted. It's just good to get that perspective, because all of the issues that we're fighting for, some of them feel like luxury in America when you compare the issues in other countries. That doesn't make our issues any less. It means we should continue to build, to be greater, to challenge ourselves, to be tough on ourselves, to create that greatness. One thing I wanted to helps me center myself is my why. And I think about my two boys, Elijah and Justice, as my pillars. And I look at Justice, and he'll need caregivers all of his life. He is a low end of the autistic spectrum. And it says to me that if one of us can look out for two of us, then there is enough of us for all of us.
It's beautiful and poetic. Wow, powerful.
And it's just true everywhere in the world. On average, if one of us can look out for two of us, then there's enough of us for all of us. And it helped me unpack the load of responsibility to say, wow, I'm in this refugee camp. Wow, I'm in, with these child soldiers. Wow, the deforestation. It's overwhelming. And so when we take a look at what we can get our arms around, what we can do in the scope of our world, and just say, wow, if one of us could look out for two of us, then isn't there enough of us for all of us?
This time has flown, and I want to announce to our listeners on Talk Radio 77 WABC who are listening live, unfortunately, we're going to have to bring this to an end in a minute or two. For those of you that want to hear the entire interview, go to my YouTube channel. So if you go to Chuck Garcia and Google YouTube, you're going to find this whole interview. For those of you that archive any of our episodes, you'll go to chuckgarcia.com to the 77 WABC radio tab. Terry, in the time that we have remaining for our WABC listeners, let's get to the fundamental question we ask every guest. What do you want our listeners to think, feel, and do? Let's start with one. What do you want them to think about themselves and their careers?
If we can wake up in the morning and start with gratitude, that's one of those checks to say, if it's tough to feel gratitude, then we can check our own course to say, wow, how are we in the world? So facing the world with gratitude isn't always easy, but it's a good start. Starting with curiosity always keeps us young and fresh. And then thinking about, what am I doing I'm looking forward to that's bigger than me? Am I doing something that I am greater than with others, the sum of all of our parts? What's my synergy? And I also think about, Chuck, about leading with values. It's not just a moniker on a building. Like, integrity is the essence of everything, and it's a nice word. Well, integrity was one of the values of Enron. So it's not a word. Values are something that we commit to, live, breathe, and check ourselves every day. We're not perfect, but we need to have that North Star and guide to. I think, Chuck, we're in an amazing age of media where we consume and binge watch stuff, and we need to do it for escape. No doubt. It's absolutely wonderful to sit down the end of the day and escape. But what I think that we have this opportunity, unique in 2020, to be the best year ever, to have great vision, and to bring quiet stories from around the world and start to share them out loud as our true north, as our fuel, as our aspiration, as our heroes. If we have stages all over the world and stadiums and concerts dedicated to great talent, then what about the young people changing the world for good? How about putting them on a world stage for a change?
And that is a perfect place to change. To our listeners on Talk Radio 77 WABC, thank you for tuning in. I'm Chuck Garcia. You can reach me at chuck@kleinleadership.com or go to our website, chuckgarcia.com. Our guest this evening was Terry Torok. Terry, thank you so much for coming on to the show. And if you could, please stay on. So we're going to continue this interview on YouTube. To our 77 WABC listeners, good night. See you next week.
What a pleasure, Chuck. Thank you.
Terry, indeed. So let's stay on now. We'll cut the tape this way. Thank you for all those wonderful stories. Particularly, you are bringing a perspective to many of us, as hard as times seem. To many of the worlds that you have seen, that's just another day at the office. And I really appreciate you coming back home to the United States to work in the service of other people's success at Enactus. Let's explore that for a moment then. What do you do in the service of a college student who comes to you with this budding idealism? I want to save the whales, the children, and the world. But how old are you? 18. Okay. Maybe there's other things that we need to build around besides your idealism. What do you say to them?
Yeah, cool. So I try to chunk it down and listen first, be very interested as I really am. They are my fuel. And sometimes they have their why, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes the why gets overstated. It's like, they say the two most important days in your life is the day you were born, the day you find out why.
Indeed.
But I also often get them to say, hey, do you have your why? Now, don't use that as pressure. If you don't, it's cool. Go get a bunch of whats. Go fill up whats. Fuel your passion. And then let's talk about not only the how, but the when. So the how is something is, do you have a method? Do you have a path? If you got a goal, how are you going to get there? Let's map it out. So we talk a lot about putting it out on a map, literally a life map and a goal map. And we do that a lot with a lot of students all over the world. It's really spectacular. And everybody should have a goal map or a life map. And then we talk about the win, because it's one thing to enjoy video games. It's another thing to play a little bit more, play past midnight, go blow into the evening, maybe binge watch, and then wake up too tired to actually get to the win. So managing our precious time is the one thing that I let them fully appreciate and realize that, hey, you might be anxious about saving whatever that is right now. It's going to happen, man. Keep it right there in front of you. But let's talk about that when and that how. And then the other thing, Chuck, is a lot of the students I work with it's heavy stuff, man. I mean, they're working on really tough, challenged communities. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot on a young person's mind and heart. I know, been living it, and so I also say, look, entertain the bigger picture. If you're not having fun with what you're doing, then what on earth are we doing here? So try to really help the life balance of where's the joy. And I try to use the frame adventure learning, and just where's the adventure? Because if you frame it as adventure and you frame it as joy, you'll bring others along with you. And man, there's nothing like a good road trip.
Yeah, you bring others with you. That's a good point. Let's talk about that. In the last two words of the word Enactus, it's us. And we love that term because this is us, popular TV show. Us. What you said earlier in your quote is really how we build communities. If there's enough of us, or there's two of us, that's enough for all of us. And the actors talk about all of us is better than any one of us. How do you build your communities in Enactus, given the need for people? They want to compete, they want to win, all that, but there's something so much more to Enactus than that. Talk about that.
It's funny. Behind me, there's a board. There's us.
Right.
Got that one. And then I have these two.
Not they. I'll say that for anyone who doesn't have a visual on us. Terry held up us and not they. I get that.
Yeah. And what's important about that, I have a great colleague, Hoffman, is there is no they. They'll do this, they do that, they the government, they those people. If you take they out of your language set and say there's only us, and if you look at the spinning ball that we're on, flying through the air at 106,000 kilometers per hour, spinning, traveling around the sun, also our whole universe is moving, then the galaxy is moving, and you look at us back at Earth, you go, you'd think we'd be doing everything possible just to hang on. So I look at that and say, if we could just pull out and go, that's us. There is no they. So it's up to us. And so, said on planet Earth, there's no passengers, only crew.
We're all driving.
Yeah, when you help, when you make a conscious choice to check your language, sometimes you're like, hey, every time I say they, check yourself. Because that's just your brain trying to group a bunch of humans into a behavior that probably doesn't fit. And if you drill in, there's no two people alike, so there's no they such capacity. There is no such thing as they. And so when we think of the world as us, Chuck, and enact us, it's like, what can we do? And, we're born into this moment in the most amazing time on earth. And we're here for just a short run, man. It's us.
I love your optimism. And I want to conclude is there are a lot of college students that I'm certain are listening, not just my students, but that's a big community. I want to talk what they often come to me for career advice. And what I talk about is mindset, and I talk about skill set, and I say they are equal. Don't just think that teaching you a bunch of skills is good enough. It's not. But I would love your advice to the college students, both Enactus and otherwise.
Yep.
In this day and age, what are the three pieces of, be it skill set or mindset? They're interchangeable.
Yep.
What do you suggest they focus on developing to climb their mountain of success?
Yeah, cool. I'm gonna riff off your skill set and mindset. I really like that frame, Chuck. Thank you for doing that. Your students have a lot to benefit from you. So if I was looking at skill set and mindset, maybe on the top of that I would put theory, and on the bottom of that I would put experience, because I often ask students what's more important, theory or experience. You can pick one. A lot of times when I'm out there talking to students, they talk about experience, which is cool. And I invite them to have an experience, get an experience, make it an adventure. But when we talk about businesses, we talk about those that have the most experience. You can stack up Blockbuster Video. You could put Polaroid cameras out there. You could put Kodak in there. You could put Ford Motor Company in there. Was it the ones with the most amount of experience that are accelerating now? No, they have the right theory. So Instagram blows Polaroid out of the water and makes them, who made Blockbuster obsolete. Here comes Amazon and Netflix. So having the right theory, knowing what you're in. So I love your mindset skill set frame. I would then also put to that theory, and then testing that theory with your friends, and making sure your professors and those that can support you in that theory, making sure you get experience. And then inside of that, I would put fuel your passion, optimize your performance,
Good.
and really get to know and articulate your purpose. And so when I think about passion, performance, purpose as your roadmap, I love your mindful, skillful. I would then add to that top is, what theory are you on? Is it obsolete? Are you on a good theory? And is it in balance with your experience?
Yeah, well, I think that lends itself. The theory is certainly helping people to think, not just think about the subject matter, but to think differently about themselves. And if there's anything that I try to do in the classroom, it's really not skill-based. And certainly, I teach communication skills, and I teach a social science called emotional intelligence. Those are important to me in the evolution of my own career. And it's what I know. So it's what I teach others, because I know what worked for me. I can't say I know what works for everybody else. But it's guys like you and me that I think part of our mission is to help them to stop thinking about the grades and the achievement necessarily, more about the Rumi quote that we open up this show with on the radio is, yesterday I was clever and I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. And what I love about Enactus is you inspire people to think about how to change themselves, but you don't use those words. I do, because it's part of my mission to be very clear. I am not here to teach you a skill set. I'm here to help you to change yourself. That's what you do. Do you think of it that way?
Often no. I mean, and not as a forethought, Chuck. To be fair, sometimes you listen first, lead them down, help them support a pathway of passion, and let them discover themselves in the road trip. Right. Sometimes when you point it out, you can stumble over it. It could be a roadblock. It could be a speed bump. So taking, a road trip to a destination, it's discovering that aha moment for people happens at their own time frame. Hard to force. You can give them the tools to listen, to check. But when you get to point it out as an operation of listening with great intent, helping guide them, and when they get to that aha moment, be there, surround them with love, support, kindness, all that good stuff, man, because Chuck, your parents try to teach you stuff, you weren't ready for it. No way, man. And, the other thing I think about a lot, it's funny, we at Enactus, we stand on stages, and there's a lot of adults that stand up and go, you guys are going to change the world and it's your world and, you know, it's on your hands. And, you know, my son heard that. It's like, Dad, it's like you guys threw a party for 100 years and you want us to clean it up. I don't that,
He's a wise man.
Yeah. So I'm like, so I say to students, if anybody tells you, you know, the world's your oyster and this is you and you're going to change it, I just look them square in the eye and just remind them they ain't dead yet. Long as we here. We are in partnership. I am learning just like my students are learning, and we're on the same spinning ball flying through space at who knows how fast. So we're all learning together and just, man, listen better, be more interested, share what we know, try not to profess it as static information, but dynamic information, and do the best we can and be very, very open and honest. This year, 2020, man, I hope we all get vision. I hope it's the best year ever.
Oftentimes, you know, the great innovations of the world come out of the darkness and the abyss. Yeah. And I am very optimistic about what we're going to learn out of this, because we're going to come back better. We're going to come back different. And that's a good thing. Yeah. And I think we're going to come back in a way where I stand on the foundation of my coaching and my teaching, that we're all each other's teachers. I'm not the sage on the stage. You're not the sage. We're the guides on the side. We're helping people, guide them up that mountain to help them to realize, you know, what am I bringing to the world? What is that contribution? So we're going to leave here to our listeners. Terry, what a pleasure. Thank you for coming into my life, for one.
Chuck, it's so
into each other's life on LinkedIn. It was
it's cool. That's another thing, is just, you know, making sure your profile is engaging. And Chuck, look, what an honor. I love what you do. Thank you for what you do in the world. 77, by the way, one of my favorite numbers in the world.
Yeah, they're a great partner. I'm so blessed.
We're off there, but
they're good to me.
We have a 77-second film festival at Enactus. You know, Chuck, anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about Enactus can go to enactus.org and explore. Yep. Just explore, ask questions. There are other organizations out there, and I hope that we all line up and link to what's greater than all of us and what's the important purpose. I love what I do. I love Enactus. I invite anybody to jump in, take a look, learn, ask good questions. But Chuck, I am deeply grateful to you and this opportunity today. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Terry. I'm really blessed. And to our listeners, particularly to our executive listeners, Enactus could always use executives, particularly for the competition. They tend to be the judges. Yeah. So I know when the team that I was coaching, there were executives who were coaching that presentation that were from Walmart and Pepsi and a bunch of places. They all brought their hearts. They didn't just bring their minds. They brought their whole selves to work that day. And they really worked, in their feedback was in the service of the success of our students. There's no higher calling than that. That's a beautiful thing. So Terry, great to have you here. To our listeners, thank you for hanging in here on YouTube for 42 minutes or 44 minutes. To our ABC listeners, we appreciate you switching over to YouTube, but it's a pleasure. We will continue every week to tell stories of transformation, and it's guests like Terry that really makes me grateful to be able to help share those stories, and maybe through all of us, we'll figure out how to make 2020 the best year in the history of the world. So Terry, thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you for your passion, Chuck.